What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
The oldest Soviet brand from Gorky, was also the first in terms of supplying its own products abroad. It all started with the Gaz M20 Pobeda, which was called abroad in the same way as in the country, just its name was written in Latin, Pobeda. It took place in cooperation between the Foreign Trade Association Auto Export and the Soviet-Finnish company Canella. Finns took a positive attitude to the Soviet car, because despite its slow speed and weak stove, it was quite reliable and easy to maintain. A little later, Pobeda appeared in other European countries, and some European dealers independently supplied cars to USA. Since GAZ M20 made a positive impression on Western motorists, primarily Finns, almost immediately after the start of production. Of the new model, the 21st Volga, it was sent abroad on a well-trodden path, called simply and uncomplicatedly, Volga with the appropriate Latinization of the index GAZ 2122 depending on the body modification. Volgas were delivered not only to Scandinavian and Benelux countries, but even to England, of course, with the controls moved to the right side. The lever of three-stage mechanics was moved to the floor. Another unusual modification is a three-row station wagon, which appeared thanks to the efforts of Canella. In 1961, representatives of the Soviet-Belgian enterprise Skaldia Volga S.A. addressed the gear body atelier with a request to develop a variant of exterior modernization, this facelift for the European market, which was made in the form of a prototype. However, the second series of Volga was already in production in the USSR and the third series was being prepared, so the idea of redesigning a Soviet sedan in Europe was abandoned in favor of a production car of the second edition. But the most interesting and unusual thing was that in Belgium they not only sold Volgas and serviced them, but also installed a foreign heart instead of the rather voracious Soviet gasoline engine. For such modification, the car was received as a complete set without an engine, but with a gearbox. Diesel engines were installed by another Belgian company, a technical partner of Skaldia called Sobimpex N.V. These were Rover and Peugeot Indina XUD units. The geography of Volga presence was quite wide. Apart from Scandinavia and Benelux countries, small batches of cars were delivered, even to Singapore, Indonesia, Pakistan, and India. When the plant switched to the Volga of a fundamentally new generation, car sets of sedans and station wagons were delivered to Belgium. And the Skaldia Volga was also equipped with Peugeot Indina XD 2P diesel engine instead of the native engine. Quite economical diesel Volgas with indices 24 to 76 and 24 to 77 were in much greater demand in Europe than their gasoline counterparts. But by the mid-80s, interest in the outdated model fell so much that the situation was not saved even by imported engines, and Volga left Europe. Well, the nomenclature GAZ 3102 was not exported at all, remaining only a service car for Soviet officials. A separate mention deserves an even rarer modification from Canella, equipped not with a diesel, but with a Ford Essex Series V6 engine with an output of 140 horsepower along with a 4-speed manual transmission. The power unit was borrowed from the Ford Capri. This Super Volga differed in interior trim, other tires, as well as installed autonomous heater and windshield wipers and headlight washers. AZLK almost simultaneously with the Pobeda Canella began to supply Finland and 400th Moskvitch, the name of which was also Latinized, turning the small car into Moskvitch. However, European contemporaries were somewhat puzzled by the power characteristics of the 23 horsepower engine, as well as not the most effective brakes and virtually no trunk. Nevertheless, Moskvitch for some time also found its buyer in a number of European countries. But Opel's archaic design and pre-war appearance did not contribute to the car's popularity in the West. However, already in the second half of the 50s, the new Moskvitch model went to conquer Europe, and the visual similarity with the Volga only contributed to the sales of the 402nd. It is interesting that the car was offered not only under Moskvitch, and Moskvitch brands, but also under its own brand, Elite. The sound name appeared not just for a reason. In some countries there was a threat to get a legal suit for a 3-digit index with a 0 in the middle. Such were the prerogative of the French company Peugeot. Even more popular in Europe was the 407th, which was even assembled from kits at Skaldia's partner company Sobimpex N. It, as well as the Volga, also did not do without a Perkins diesel engine, and the car had several different names: Skaldia Diesel, Skaldia Special Deluxe, and Skaldia Essence. In Norway, the Moskvitch 407 was sold under the name Moskvitch Pilot. An eloquent fact about the popularity of Moskvitch abroad: regularly the export share of all produced cars exceeded 50%. In the mid-60s, a fundamentally new model entered the arena, the Moskvitch 408, which radically differed from its predecessor in appearance. Thanks to the actual design and good reputation of the brand in Europe, the 408 also sold well in Finland, Scandinavian countries, Great Britain, and other European countries. Dealer Moskvitch sometimes differed in interior trim and exterior decor. Depending on the market, a Moskvitch could be called as Elite, Elite Deluxe, or even Moskvitch Carrot. Of course, sedans and station wagons were assembled in Belgium at Skaldia, selling them under the name Skaldia, Skaldia Elite, and Skaldia Weekend. Some cars were traditionally equipped with a Perkins diesel engine instead of the native 1,360 cubic centimeters gasoline engine, which turned the car into a Skaldia diesel. When the version with a more powerful 1.5-litre UFA engine was released, the Moskvitch 412 was exported for some time in parallel with the 408, and the share of exports reached a record 65%. The model name for the West could contain both figures 412 and 1500, and the words Skaldia and Elite in different variations of combinations. It looked quite logical, because the products of the Moscow automobile plant were well known in Europe under these names. However, since 1966, the Moskvitch 408 was also called Rila, and under this name it came off the assembly line of the plant located in Bulgaria, where Moskvitch 407K kits were delivered from Moscow. On the success of Moskvitch abroad did not fail to affect the participation in the Rally Marathon London-Sydney, 1968, and London-Mexico, 1970. However, in the early 70s, interest in the model began to fade, because its appearance is almost a decade old. Therefore, the Finns developed their own version of modernization of Moskvitch under the name Moskvitch 412 Canella, which was to differ in design of the front and rear parts, and according to the idea of the Finnish creators, the filler neck of the gas tank was to move from its traditional place under the license plate to the rear fender. However, the demand for the 412th was falling every year. Only AZLK 2140 and 2138 station wagon on its base could correct the situation. More modern design of the front end, front disc brakes, presentable interior with a massive dashboard, a nice steering wheel, and new seats with headrests were liked by foreigners, which allowed Moskvitch to stay afloat abroad for a few more years. However, both the rear-wheel drive layout and the redesigned body itself were losing relevance in a particularly small class every year. Therefore, it sold worse and worse in the countries of Scandinavia, Benelux, and Great Britain. The situation was partially corrected by the GDR and other socialist countries of Eastern Europe. The situation on the market was somewhat cheered up by the appearance of luxury modification Moskvitch 2140-117, commonly known as the Moskvitch 2140 SL Lux, also began to be assembled at the plant Borken in the Bulgarian city of Lovech. Its design with developed plastic bumpers, large taillights, and a new colored interior definitely liked consumers on both sides of the Iron Curtain. But again, from our side of the Berlin Wall. However, neither the possible painting of the body in the new-fashioned metallic, nor radial tires, nor a faster gearbox in the mid-80s could not radically correct the situation. Moskvitch became simply irrelevant for Europeans. Everything changed, or could change, with the release of the AZLK 2141, which was planned to be sold in Europe under the name Alico. Alas, the large and modern car with a spacious interior initially suffered a heart defect not having its own engine. At first, it was fitted with a 6-cylinder engine from VAZ 2106, then the offer was supplemented with the UFA motor UZM331 Andelt, and 10, which was a veteran motor adapted to the new body and front-wheel drive from the former Moskvitchy. But both versions, in fact, were stillborn, especially in the saturated Europe. Even against the background of the Soviet Sputnik Samara 41st looked extremely pale, and if you compare it with European classmates. The difficult position of the new Moskvitch Alico in the West was also complicated by the woefully low quality of manufacturing and assembly. The car was full of loose bolts and parts that failed within the first few thousand kilometers. In an effort to change the situation, the German importer of Ladas, the company Deutsche Lada GmbH, decided to give Alico a heart transplant, installing in the engine compartment an atmospheric 1.8-litre diesel engine Ford XLD 418, which developed 58 horsepower and 100 Newton-meters of torque. And the importer decided to sell such a car in Germany under the brand Lada. Fully, the car was called, imagine, Lada Alico. The French importer, the firm Lada Park SA, which belonged to the enthusiast Jean-Jacques Park, approached the issue in an original and thorough way, but from the point of view of exterior. The version called Alico SL received new bumpers, grille, wheel covers and trunk lid spoiler. In some European countries, Alico was sold under the truncated Index 141, but neither the efforts of the French nor the efforts of the Germans did not help the front-wheel drive Moskvitch, whose sales were measured in hundreds, not thousands of copies. And after the collapse of the USSR, Alico quietly left the European market, becoming the last model of AZLK, which was exported abroad. The Izhevsk plant's products were almost never exported. Almost, because in 1978, on the order of the Finns in Izhevsk on the basis of the 27151-01 model, they created a modification with an extended cargo platform, and it was increased only in the rear overhang area. Another difference is rectangular headlights. And, of course, the name Elite Pickup. ZZ. It is not a secret that in terms of layout, the first Zaporozhets reproduced Italian Fiat 500 quite accurately. Minimal dimensions, 2 doors, air-cooled engine located at the back, all this favorably affected the price and allowed to consider the car with good cross-country ability interesting enough even for young citizens of the USSR with small income. However, both Belgians and Finns saw in the Soviet Fiat the potential and prospects in terms of sales in Europe. However, the name Zaporozhets, difficult to pronounce in transliteration, had to be changed. In Finland, Canella sold ZZ965 as Jalta, and in Belgium, Skaldia Volga designated the car as Yalta. There was also a variant Iliet. With the Zaporozhets, everything turned much more interesting, because in 1968, not without efforts on the part of Skaldia at the exhibition in Brussels, presented Yalta 1000, ZAZ966 with Renault liquid-cooled engine. The car was planned to be assembled from kits in Belgium, but the matter was limited to the very single copy. A year later, an export version of the IRD with a 43 horsepower engine was presented in Europe. The modernized version with the Index 968 was also supplied to the countries of both CMEA and Western Europe, including Scandinavia, under the brands ZAZ 968, Iliet and Yalta. As for Tavria was much less lucky. The model, due to various reasons, was late with the market entry for a whole decade, and the plant could not overcome childhood diseases for a long time and come to any decent production volumes. The car looked quite good, was equipped with an economical 1.1-litre liquid-cooled engine and had a front-wheel drive layout with transverse location of the power unit. ZZ 1102 tried to sell in Hungary, Poland, France, Great Britain, and even Greece. However, the mediocre quality of manufacturing and assembly faults put an end to the export career of Tavria. In addition, after gaining self-styled independence, the plant faced such a pile of organizational and economic problems that it was not up to export. VAZ, when in 1966, the USSR concluded an agreement with the Italian concern Fiat to acquire license and launch production of the OV. The modified 124 model at the plant, which was built by the whole country, the export of future Giguli was considered from the very beginning, because it would give the country an inflow of much-needed foreign currency, which would be able to repay the state's expenses on the project of a mass-produced small car. Therefore, there is nothing surprising in the fact that since 1971, the one was to conquer Eastern Europe. However, there was a problem. The name Giguli, chosen from hundreds of others, which meant the mountains in the Volga uplands, was not distinguished by its euphony for foreigners, because it was consonant with the word gigolo. Therefore, for foreign markets, the model was renamed Lada, and this applied not only to the VAZ 2101, but also to the subsequent Giguli, the 2, 3, VAZ 2106, and so on. At the same time, a digital index was added to the trade name, denoting the engine displacement, 1200, 1300, 1500, and equipment, was designated by letters S, E, ES. Export Ladas differed from their counterparts for the domestic market in interior and body finish, because in an effort to make the car more attractive to Western consumers, importers tried to ennoble and modernize the standard Giguli. In Western Europe, Giguli appeared in the mid-70s, when Fiat removed its 124th from production. No less popular was the 3, which in some countries was sold under the name Comtesse. And in this case, the matter was not limited to decoration. There was a version 1500S automatus with a real 3-speed automatic GM 3L30. The 6 did not escape the fate of its predecessors. German importer Deutsche Lada offered a sporty version 1600 LS with alloy wheels, ATS and large fog lights, and British importer Setra Motors even covered the roof with vinyl in the manner of American sedans, offering the rest of the gentleman's kit in the form of casting, Goodyear tires, and stereo system. VZ2106 even appeared across the ocean, in Canada. The so-called Canadians differed from ordinary cars by aluminum bumpers with integrated headlights. In short, by the end of the 70s, the geography of Lada Jiggly presence covered more than one continent. The new family, which consisted of models 2105, 2107 and 2104, it had to go abroad, because it differed from Fiat 124 much more than the previous models, and could refresh the interest to Ladas in Europe. The right-hand drive 5 was named Riva, and in Germany it was additionally equipped with a spectacular aerodynamic Dodger and called Nova Special, and without it, just Nova. But Finns went much further, having equipped the 7 with turbocharger, well and sunroofs in the roof. Improved interior trim and light alloy discs by that time became a kind of standard for dealer Ladas. Like the 6, VAZ2107 ended up in North America, to be more precise, in Canada, where it was known as Signet together with its brothers in the 5th family. And in Germany, the 7 was sometimes called Toscana. Universal, depending on the market, was called Signet Wagon, Riva Estate, Nova Combi, and even Kalinka Olymp, differing from a standard 4 by body and interior trim, as well as such specific exterior elements as roof rails. Front-wheel drive 8 Lada Sputnik was originally called Lada Sputnik, and it was exported under the name Lada Samra, and it happened almost immediately after the launch of serial production, and immediately the cars were sent to Europe by tens of thousands per year. Lada Sputnik turned out to be surprisingly receptive to various exterior refinements, which practiced by dealers almost all export. Short wings changed the notorious beak, radiator grille, replacing it with a less distinctive detail. In addition, the car received different versions of bumpers, spoilers, and dodgers, as well as a new design of the front end in some versions, which was accompanied by the installation of the original 4-light optics, round or square. The most famous was Kolota, with design by Vladimir Yatsev, who worked at Scaldia and lived in Belgium. In addition to the fact that all modifications of the 8, 9 and 99th hit the European market, the 3-door hatchback was literally blown off the roof. And it happened as completely in the form of Cabrio or Cabrio versions Natasha and partially, when the 8 had the rear part of the roof removed, turning it into a Lando called Fun. And as for names and configurations, even without counting those already mentioned, there were a great number of them. Bend your fingers: Sable, Sigona, Diva, Forma, Juno, Rosso, Volante, as well as names indicating the equipment: SX, GSX, SL, GL, GLX, GLX, XDX, Mister, Hand Seat, Top, Optima, Summertime, Night, Sprint, Springer, Saga, Flight, Envy. It can be safely stated that no Soviet car can be compared with Samara by the number of modifications and versions. Black and white, European dealers really did the impossible, turning the standard Sputnik into 1 million original versions and configurations. After all, it existed not only with an open body, but also in the cargo modification van, and could be equipped with a Peugeot diesel engine. Moreover, already in the post-Soviet period, Samara with the prefix Baltic was assembled, welded, and even painted in Finland at the Valmet plant, but this example is a bit out of our review. The all-wheel drive Niva stands apart in every sense against the background of other Togliatti cars. VZ2121, it was almost immediately supplied to foreign markets and won them thanks to an amazing combination of car comfort and off-road potential, which was previously distinguished only by Range Rover. More than 100 countries of the world and tens of thousands of fans on 6 continents. All this is Niva. It would seem that the car could be quietly called Lada Niva, because this short name sounded perfectly in all languages, but dealers renamed their own versions in Cossack, Trek, Street, Tropez, Grande Large, Deauville, Austro Tiger, Savan, California, Constant, IKRA and others. P.S. In addition to cars, Tuning and naming were subjected even to such a severe Soviet off-road vehicle as UAZ-469, somehow transformed by efforts of Martorelli brothers into UAZ Martorelli. In conclusion, the fascinating world of Soviet cars reveals a unique blend of innovation and adaptation. While these vehicles were often referred to by different names abroad, their distinct characteristics set them apart from local models. From their robust design to their utilitarian features, Soviet cars not only served their purpose but also left a lasting impression on automotive history. Understanding these differences enriches our appreciation for the global automotive landscape and the cultural exchanges that shape it. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the intriguing legacy of Soviet automobiles.